reflexive property. Reflexive property, we haven't used this word, but this is really just a fancy way of saying that if a line segment is shared, then it's equivalent to each other. So this is, we've talked about this. This is basically just saying that TV is equal to TV. So notice how both these triangles share this line segment. So we're saying this line segment, because it's shared, is equal for both triangles. So we've got TV is equal to TV. Okay, so right now we have two sides, and so they want to go into HL, which is one of our proofs for congruence, but I actually think they should have put in, we should have put in one additional step. I'm going to call this step 2A. And that is that angle S is congruent, is 90 degrees, and then angle U is 90 degrees. So both of these are 90 degrees. So I'll say angle S is a right angle, and angle T is a right angle. This sign here, that sign just means right angle. If you see this sign, that means right triangle. So we have this line segment is congruent to this one. They share this middle line segment, and we've got a right angle in both of these. Okay, they both share a right angle. Now usually, so right now we say side angle. Usually that's not enough to prove congruence, but because we have a right angle, we have side angle, and because it's a right triangle, we can use the Pythagorean theorem to find this third side. So we know this third side must be congruent too. So I've talked about this as being side by Pythagorean theorem. We also sometimes will write that as HL, hypotenuse leg. The hypotenuse is the longest side of a right triangle, and a leg is just one of the other sides. So right now we proved then by HL, or side by right triangles, that this triangle STV, is congruent to our other triangle, triangle TUV, and therefore, if these two triangles are congruent, that means all the corresponding angles are congruent. So we know this angle is congruent to this one. This angle is congruent to this one. So SVT is congruent to UTV, because these are corresponding parts on congruent triangles. So therefore, these parts must be congruent. So again, I just shorten that as being CP CTC. And remember, I said that was CP CTC stands for congruent parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Ooh, not congruent. Actually, congruent works there, but actually should say corresponding parts. Corresponding parts. So corresponding parts on congruent triangles are congruent. Okay, so number 8. Now let's fill in this proof. Number 8, we have given GH is parallel to JI, I is the midpoint of HK, and GH is congruent to JI. So let's make sure all those are filled in. So GH is parallel to JI. Okay, so GH is parallel to JI. We have that written in. That's these little arrows mean that. Okay, so the reason for that is it's given. Then I is the midpoint of HR. So I is the I is the midpoint of HK. And this is also given. Now, when we know something's the midpoint on a line segment, that means we're splitting HK into 2 equal parts. So think about what else we could label with that. We know that this part's going to be equal to that part, so I'm just going to label that on my triangle. That means these must be the same. Okay? And then the third thing they said was GH is congruent to JI. So GH is congruent to JI. And that was given, but let's just write that in. GH is congruent to ooh, that's meant to be JI. JI. So GH is congruent to JI. And 4 says that HI, so HI is congruent to JK. Okay. So I'll just say this actually goes here. HI is congruent to JK because of the midpoint. So I'll just say midpoint. Because this is the midpoint, so it's split into 2 even parts. And 4, 5. So look, we're looking for corresponding. That's going to be the reason. So notice that these angles, that these sides are parallel. So remember, if we've got parallel sides, we know that our corresponding angles are going to be congruent. So if we have parallel sides, so if GH and JI are parallel, and we're being cut by a transversal, remember all of your corresponding parts are going to be congruent. So this is going to be congruent to that. This will be congruent to that. If we had sides over here, this angle would be congruent to this whole angle. So remember, your corresponding parts are going to be congruent. So I know that this is going to be congruent to that. So I'll write that. I'll say angle H is congruent to angle, I'll call this angle JIK just to avoid ambiguity, so we know it's this side, to angle JIK. And that's because they're corresponding angles on parallel lines. So now we've got side, angle, side. On both of these, share side and angle on a side. They don't share, they've got congruent side, angle, side. So therefore, we know that the entire triangle must be congruent. Triangle GHI is congruent to triangle JIK. So thus, because they're congruent triangles, we know that all corresponding parts of those triangles are congruent. So hence, angle G will be congruent to angle J. We also know that these sides would be congruent and that these angles would be congruent. We know that all the corresponding parts will be congruent. Okay, so that was number 8. Now on the next page for 16, you're doing the same thing. You're just going to have to do the entire table yourself. Okay? So write a 2-column proof for each. So let's set up my 2 columns. I'll have statements and reasons. Statements and reasons. Okay. So given GH is congruent to JK. So for 16, it says given GH is congruent to JK. So GH is congruent to JK, and the reason is it's given. Okay, that's our first line. GH is congruent to JK, so that's already labeled for us. And HI is congruent to KL. That's also labeled for us, but let's add that to our column. To KL. This is given, so HI is congruent to KL. That's also given. And IG is congruent to LJ. IG is congruent to JL. This is also given. Prove that angle I is congruent to angle L. Okay, now we have on this triangle, see which one of our congruence proofs we have. Alright, so you should see you got side, side, side congruence. So we know then that these triangles are going to be congruent. So triangle GHI is congruent to triangle JKL by side, side, side. Okay, and I'm going to finish this one up with, let's see, if you need more space, feel free to do this on a separate sheet of paper. For me, I'm just going to venture over to this proof to this side and make a little new statements and reasons. And I'll actually just make 2 columns, SR, statements, reasons. So right now I just proved that these 2 triangles are congruent. So therefore, if they're congruent, our corresponding parts have to be congruent. So we see angle I is here, angle L is here, they're in corresponding positions. So angle I is congruent to angle L by CP/CTC. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Okay. Oh, you guys are doing this next one on your own. Number 18. We have, so I'll set up my statements and reasons chart. I'll do S and R. So given angle U is congruent to angle V. So angle U. So given angle U is congruent to angle V. This was given to us. And angle T was congruent to angle W. This was also given. And line segment, and both of these were labeled already on your chart. And that line segment TU was congruent to line segment VW, so that's also labeled. TU is congruent to VW, also given. I'll just continue this with another chart so I don't run out of space. So right now I have all of these parts are given. I see, okay, see which of our congruence theorems we have. Should see we've got angle, side, angle, angle, side, angle. So therefore, by angle, side, angle, we know that these triangles are congruent. Triangle STU is congruent to triangle VXW. VXW. These 2 triangles are congruent. So thus, if angle S and angle X are in congruent positions, are in corresponding positions, they must be congruent. So therefore, angle S will be congruent to angle X by CP/CTC. They're in corresponding parts on congruent triangles, so therefore they are congruent. Okay, number 20. Number 20, let's set up our statements and reasons chart. Statements, reasons. So we've got GH is congruent to JI. Here we go. GH is congruent to JI, and the reason is that's given to us. And angle GHJ is congruent to angle IJH. Angle GHI is congruent to angle IJH. Angle IJH, and this is also given to us. We got to prove that GJ, that GJ is congruent to HI. So we got to prove that. So right now, we've got a side and angle, and notice that they share this side in the middle. So I'll just say side HJ is equal to side HJ. And remember, we called this the reflexive property. So that's what that reflexive property is. These are equal to each other, so I'll just put a little tick mark. These are equal to each other. So right now, let's see what we got. We've got side, angle, side, side, angle, side. So by side, angle, side, these triangles are going to be congruent. Triangle GJH is congruent to triangle, I'm putting the second line just because I ran out of space. GJH is congruent to IJH. This was by side, side, side. So thus, if these 2 triangles we just proved are congruent, all of our corresponding parts must be congruent. So therefore, GJ must be congruent to HI because they're in corresponding positions. So GJ must be congruent to HI by CPCTC. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Okay? All right.